getting to our main topic here on this extra special episode of Mastering Dungeons. We are going to do our twofer. First, our 2024 5e mini review, and then we will get to Greyhawk and talk about more regions that we may see in the Dungeon Master's Guide of 2024. So, this week we want to talk about conditions. Conditions are something that have creeped more and more, I think, into our D&D game over the editions. And so we're going to talk about why we have them, why designers use them, what were they in 2014, and what have they become in 2024, if anything. So as design goals, Teos, you may disagree, but I'm going to break it down this way.
All right.
We've said before that if you put role-playing and story aside as a game, D&D is about reducing the enemies to 0 hit points before they reduce you to 0 hit points. Obviously, an oversimplification, but if you break it down, there is an underlying structure that's you win if you can take the monsters down, you lose if they take you down. Okay.
Yep.
So why conditions? Well, conditions are meant to make that goal of knocking the monsters to 0 before you get to 0 a little more interesting, with a little more fun and a little more flavor, because there's also the story elements that need to be involved. Why do we need petrified as a condition in our game of D&D? Because in our mythology, we have basilisks and medusae and things that turn you to stone. So the game needs to support that story-wise and therefore mechanically. Why do we need the charmed condition? Well, because we have stories with succubi and vampires and things that alter your mind and make you serve them or befriend them. So therefore, since it's in our stories, it needs to be in our games. So it's got that dual purpose of flavor of stories and mechanics to make things more interesting than you take 27 hit points of damage. Whew. With that, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to get some thoughts from Teos on this whole what are conditions and why.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that increasingly what designers found is that it's a bit of a mess when everything is described differently, right? When the Medusa petrifies one way, the Gorgon another, the trap does it an entirely different way. Everything's a one-off, and every designer is doing it differently. So it's a problem for the designers as well. Oh, well, I did it that way. Oh, I did it this way, right? And the play experience is a surprise and not necessarily for the better. It also means that these conditions are completely not balanced. So if you want players to do them in any way, through a magic item, through a feature of their class, you start wanting to standardize it. Because now it'll work all in one way. The same way that you want to have climb rules be a thing you can look up. You want to look up what it means to knock someone prone and not have it be 5 different ways for 5 different features. So it becomes a standard block that designers can use, players can use, DMs can use. And now the DM knows what's going on. Games like 4th edition did this a lot, right? Where you just saw that every power, it might just be damage, but it might set you on fire. It might knock you prone. It might push you, slide you, all these various things. And so having those as keywords is helpful to know what it means. 5th edition pulled back a bit from 4th edition, right? It made things a little looser, but still wanted that definition. So we see that with being hidden, for example, where it tried to dance in between the here is everything you need to know to decide whether something's hidden but DM, you make the call as to whether your target is distracted and whether the factors allow for hiding or not. They were trying to play in between both. I think now we see in 2024 an attempt to be more codified. And so everything's in this rules glossary. And these are keywords that are supposed to be more stable and less about making call, which is in part a big change between 2014 and 2024 of whether the DM is making a call. And you can let's say it the positive way. 2014 said, we want to empower the DM to take the reins of the game and make calls. And 2024 is saying, we want to free up the DM from having to make calls all the time that'll get questioned.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's
Which
very
one
true.
you like?
Yeah. And that's why, jumping sideways here, that's why in the 2024 books, we see so many capitalized words, because we were seeing words used with their regular connotation matching words that were game terms.
Mm-hmm.
So, if something is charmed, is it charmed just because they feel a kinship or attracted to a creature, or are they charmed as in the magical compulsion? And sometimes when the word was used one way in one place, it questioned whether it was a game term or not. So now they've gone to using these capital letters. So when you are prone, small p, it just means you're lying down. When it's prone with a capital P, it means you have a condition that means
Mm-hmm.
very concrete things in the game. How important are conditions to 2024 D and 5e D&D? How many times do you think the word condition or conditions or conditional appears in the 2024 Player's Handbook?
Well, I
Well, I'm
know
glad
because
you asked.
I see the number in front of me in the show notes.
Were you surprised by that
Yes, I was.
number?
That was
Yes.
way higher than I would have imagined.
You might think, oh, maybe 100 times or 200 times, 300. How about 878 times the word condition and its derivative appears in the 2024 Player's Handbook? That should be a small clue to how important conditions are in this game.
Mm-hmm.
As we go through, there was a question that came up in my mind over and over and over again. And that is it better to have more conditions that do a very specific single thing, or fewer conditions, but have them take on more weight by having more riders attached to them? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer per se. It would come down to your opinion on what's
Mm-hmm.
clearer.
Mm-hmm.
But what I mean is, as we go through, you'll see that some conditions have like 6 riders that go down them. Basically 6 little sub conditions within the condition.
Yeah.
And well, most have more than one. So my question is, as we do this, what would be better for you as a player, as a game master, as a designer? Would it be 50 small conditions that you can stack together, or these larger conditions that you can also in some way make a subset or a superset of each other?
Right. Like, for example, we could say that more like along the lines of Shadow of the Demon Lord. And I forget whether Shadow of the Demon Lord has conditions per se, but in general, it's more like you either get a boon or a bane, right? Advantage or disadvantage type of option for a thing that has happened that we would view as negative. Okay, petrified, you're turned to stone. I don't even, and the game some games might say, I don't even need to define that for you. Look, you're stone. You don't get to do stuff. You know what's up. I don't need to tell you. And everything else is going to be like you either get a boon or a bane on one side or the other, and the DM can decide. And we're done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And maybe that's great. But then also what it means is your character now just is doing these things. And so if I both knock you prone and I have something else I've done, well, I can't get double advantage, so there's not much interest. But if I can, slide you 4 feet and knock you prone and charm you and deafen you, well, now I've got lots of options, right? And that tactical juiciness is there.
Yep. And for those of you who like the more narrative, well, if you're petrified, you're just made of stone, and that pretty much sums it up. The question I have is, well, can you take psychic damage while you're petrified? Because some reasonable people would say, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? You still have a mind. And others would say, well, no, obviously not, because you're petrified.
Right. The mind
is stone. Right. So that's why these questions become important. And so as we go through, think about that.
Hmm.
So for 2014, we had a lot of conditions, and we saw many of these conditions in fourth edition. In fourth edition, many of these conditions had a rider called save ends. So what would happen is you would be attacked by the wizard, right? The wizard would hit you with a bolt of energy, which would do damage and stun you. And the stun would be save ends, which means on your turn, you wouldn't be able to act because you were stunned, but you got to make a saving throw. And if you made that saving throw, the stunned condition went away. If you failed it, you remained stunned for at least a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
It became interesting because you would end up sometimes with, especially if you were the DM and you had a monster that the group was teaming up on, you would have five, six, seven conditions on the creature all at the same time. And people were using plastic rings from soda
Yeah.
pop bottles. You know, you pull the top off and
Hmm.
it's still got that ring. And so they would collect different colored rings, or they would use rubber bands, or they would use
Hmm.
scrunchies like
Air
hair
bands. Yeah.
ties. Yeah. To put over the minis to say, all right, well, this is stunned, incapacitated, prone, on fire, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of the turn, you would have to, okay, I've got six conditions on me, so I have to roll save ends for every one of those conditions. Here we go. Oh, I
Yeah.
failed that one.
Yeah.
Oh, but I made that one. And you would remove conditions as you went.
Yeah, especially when you'd have area of attack things that would be like, oh, you're on fire, and then another thing, you've got acid damage, and also you've been charmed by this effect, and so you'd have lots of characters or miniatures with these things on there, and it was a lot to track. Many would say a little too much.
Mhm. It did get to be a little bit ridiculous. And so when we got to 5E, we have a list of 15 conditions. And I would say they are less prevalent than they were with fourth edition, at least at the start of fifth edition.
Hmm.
As
Hmm.
we went, we began to get more and more rules that were allowing these conditions to be applied to characters. What were the 15 conditions in 2014? Blinded, charmed, deafened, exhaustion, frightened, grappled, incapacitated, invisible, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, restrained, stunned, and unconscious. Whew. 15 conditions.
Hmm.
Excellent. And when I was trying to come up with a topic, I'm like, let's talk about conditions because I'm sure that there must be differences in the 2024 player's handbook. I didn't go through and read other people's analysis and lists. I just like I need to do this on my own or I won't remember. So let's do it. And I went through and I looked at all the conditions and there are 15 and they are
Hmm.
exactly the same names.
Names, yeah, yeah.
But there are slight differences in some cases. So that's what we're going to look at now. Before we dive into these individual ones, Teos, do you have any other sort of overview thoughts on this topic?
No, I think you're right that in kind of core 2014 player's handbook, it seems really reasonable in play how these things happen, right? If you do an obvious, like this is a spell that is, causing vines to come up of the ground and, bind you, well, you're probably restrained, right? Something like that. But otherwise, the game was not heavy on this. It wasn't like fourth edition where it felt like every other power was doing something to apply some sort of effect like this. I do like save ends. I miss save ends. I'll say that, particularly for things like being on fire, acid damage, this kind of thing. I like just having that simple term save ends that let you know exactly what to do with it. The things that like sort of you may repeat at the end of your turn, it's the saving throw at the end of your turn or start of your turn. The language is unpredictable enough that you never know if a spell would have this or not. You almost have to look it up. And it's funny watching even the designers like Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins run Acquisitions Incorporated games, and they have to look this up because
Mhm.
you can't count on it the way you could with fourth edition. And it's not as simple as save ends that you just could have on a character sheet,
Yeah.
SA at
Yeah.
the end of it and remind yourself, no, you got to look at that. What is the wording? And they
Yeah.
often would either call it wrong or had to look it up. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is interesting. The one reason that save ends work so well in fourth edition was because there was only one save,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't a charisma save. It wasn't even going back to third edition. It wasn't a reflex save or a what else was there? Fortitude save.
Fortitude, yeah.
Boy, I'm really mixing up my editions here.
It's hard to remember
But
those like that. Yeah.
yeah, for saving throws in fourth edition, you just rolled a 20-sided die. If you got a 10 or higher, you saved. So it wasn't to do that with fifth edition. You would have to say, right, Constitution save ends DC blank, and it would. You could still say 10, but then they would still have to go and add. Oh, I'm proficient with con, so here we go, +5. Uh, it, I think it would still be good. I still like that mechanic. It would just be a little harder to adjudicate. All
Yeah,
right, so
for
here we
sure.
go.
Yep. Yeah, tell me what's changed.
2024 Player's Handbook. Let's go through one at a time. Ready? Blinded? Pretty much the same. The wording slightly changed, but the core of it is still the same. Charmed and Deafened, pretty much still the same. Now we get to the good stuff. Exhausted. Exhaustion. All right, we've talked about this already, but let's do it again. In 2014, we had an escalating scale of penalties based on your level of exhaustion. So at first level of exhaustion, you had disadvantage on ability checks. At the second level of exhaustion, your speed was halved. Your third level of exhaustion, you had disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. And that's where if the first didn't really upset you and the second was something you could work around, the third one was generally the one where people started giving up on their character. Then by the fourth level of exhaustion, a maximum hit points was halved. And by fifth level of exhaustion, your speed was reduced to 0. But there was no rule that say it couldn't be increased. So apparently, if you got some sort of spell that would increase your speed would go up by that. That's something I noted because now we're seeing a lot of, and your speed can't be increased.
Yeah.
So they didn't put that in there. So technically, based on the rules that they're now adding, your speed could be increased through magic. And at the sixth level exhaustion, you are an X character. You are dead.
Yeah.
So what did we get with 2024's exhaustion rules, Teos?
Yeah, still death at sixth level. And every level is -2 to D20 tests per level of exhaustion. So it's more wide ranging, but the -2 is probably a little more palatable to people at the initial levels. So I'd argue that by level 3, your players are looking at the DM and giving them, mean looks. I don't love either version. We've talked about it. I find that in general, this is trying to do too much. The end thing to me is that if I'm making a story about traversing the wilderness, I'm not going to just use exhaustion and make you do checks all the time. I'm going to have to create my own rule for how this all works specific to the adventure. And that's literally the point of what I shouldn't have to do. And yet I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah, I was good with the -1 to D20 checks during the play test. And when the -2 came, I thought they were what they normally would do is take the teeth away from it.
Yeah.
And so I thought it would be, something puny. And they went in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And so -2 to D20 tests. D20 tests, if you don't know, are saving throws, attack rolls, and ability checks. So that's significant. At -2, you're in the disadvantage territory. At -3, you probably go just beyond the disadvantage mathematical penalty for D20 rolls.
We're going to get arguments about that, Shawn.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm not a mathematician. I do not play one on TV or in podcasts, but we're in the ballpark here.
Yeah. Either way, I mean, I think that to me, it's less about the math of it and the mentality of it, right? Like the way Jeremy
Right.
Crawford will say, I can't believe that people cared about whether their, dwarf gave them a +2 to con or not. And I'm like, are you kidding? Have you met players, right? It's the mentality is the key. And that's the thing is I'll have to see more tables play, but I know that disadvantages on ability checks in 2014 caused players not to want to make a roll. And you can say that player is wrong all day long. Doesn't matter. That's what it does to a lot of people. Yeah. And there's some point where this -2 is going to do the same thing. And it may be as early as -4. I think -2, most players I've played with, okay, well, that's whatever. I'll do that. But at -4, they start going, well, you make the check, or I don't want to make a check, or I'll go the long way around. And now player choice is impacted, player enjoyment is impacted. -6, I mean, that seems to me well into where players are just not going to want to play the game.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that mentality, that sort of mental, the mental part of what the player brings to the game cannot be overstated. And that is another really huge benefit of playtesting. Is check the numbers. Yes, check this, check that, but also check what players are willing to put up with. Because I can tell you right now, if you take exhaustion or you take these other penalties and you take them away from what the player sees, put them on the DM, rather than saying, okay, this player has a -6 on all their checks, DM, just increase the AC or the difficulty class of the checks that they make by 6. Players would still engage. Players would engage with the game differently. Right. They would try things to overcome them. They would think outside the box rather than just throw their hands up. And so that's one thing a game designer needs to keep in mind is, where are you focusing that big, horrible penalty or advantage spotlight on the game itself and who interacts with the rule?
So let's go to Frightened. Now, am I right that did not change either, or has it changed in some way?
It really hasn't changed. Okay. What they've done, I just wanted to put this in there to show this example of what was in the old rules and what's in the new rules and how it sounds different, but it's exactly the same. So in 2014, it says a frightened creature has disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of its fear is in line of sight. The same thing in 2024 has a heading called ability checks and attacks affected. And it says you have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls while the source of fear is within line of sight. So it's basically the exact same thing, just worded differently.
Yeah.
And Frightened has 14 has the creature can't willingly move closer to its source of fear. And 2024 has can't approach. You can't willingly move closer to the source of fear. So they're putting these sort of sub conditions, like can't approach, within the main condition, which is why I asked that question at the start: is would it be better to have many more of these sub? Are there other times when can't approach might be useful other than frightened? And if we had this list that deals with everything, movement, sight, that deals with all of this, could we build our own large conditions based on just stacking those?
Well, and I would guess that, someone who wrote the 2014 version would say to the 2024 team, well, I did that because you've said can't approach, and then you've immediately added the word willingly in the next sentence, which is now an important part that they need to consider. So it's not as simple as can't approach. It's just can't approach willingly. But, so you get into that little trouble of trying to define it. It's hard, right? It's to try to and you can move so around the room such that you don't get closer, but you can't approach, you can't lessen that distance, right? That's where it's, so you still kind of have to read both. It's a nice reminder, but you might miss something if you're not careful.
Yep. Well, you know what you do, Teos. Say your character's frightened, so you can't move 10 feet to get to the monster. I'll just shoot you with a heavy crossbow and I will push you 10 feet, and then you did not willingly approach the monster and you can now attack it. So there we go.
Or bring it to you, right? If you can bring it to you where you are. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
For sure. So next is grappled. And again, pretty much the same. The only thing I want to point out is that something that I would hope they would fix that they didn't is the they talk about moving a grapple target in 2024. And I have in my 2014 game a creature, a PC that grapples everything and moves them in and out of an area of effect spells. And so I had to make special rules for if the character wanted to move a grappled creature but not move themselves. Because it seems like you should be able to do that. Take someone, move them there. Uh, so I had to create rules. And I was hoping with 2024 they would fix it. And so I saw the movable sub condition for grappled. I was like, okay, cool. And it says the grappler can drag or carry when it moves. And every foot of movement costs 1 extra foot unless you are tiny or move or 2 sizes smaller than it. So basically, it still says no, you can only drag or carry something when you, as the grappler, move with you. But what position is the grappled creature in? Is it in the exact same square relative to where you were all the time? That question is still something that I know happens in my game every single round, much less every single combat, much less every single adventure. So there you go.
More questions for Jeremy Crawford.
Exactly. Incapacitated. Incapacitated got a really big redo. In 2014, it was just an incapacitated creature can't take actions or reactions, which led to the question right away: can they take bonus actions?
Mm-hmm.
In 2024, there are 4 sub-riders that go with incapacitated. So 1, you're inactive. You can't take an action, any action, bonus action, or reaction. Okay, cool. No concentration. Your concentration is broken when you become incapacitated. Okay, that's clear. That's been added. Speechless. You can't speak. So this was added because in other places in the 2014 rules where it was, you're blank, you're whatever, you're stunned, you're unconscious, it would say you're incapacitated and you cannot speak.
Yeah.
So now they just added cannot speak to incapacitated. And with the new surprise rules, it says if you're incapacitated when you roll initiative, you have disadvantage on the roll because you're surprised. Thoughts?
I guess I feel like it sort of doesn't matter. Like, I want to think that this is, to me, 5th edition was not trying to be this defined a game. And it was at its best when it played that, when it leaned into that. Like, we're not trying to nail down every little thing. And here we're trying to nail down everything. And then, I'm wondering, well, can I take other actions? Can I take a free action?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it was to me pretty clear you can't take actions. But now that you've gone and added bonus action, now I really think that maybe I can do other types of actions. And it's just like, what do you want to nail it all? Like, you can't sort of nail it all down.
Right.
So
One thing you can do now, and when you're incapacitated, is move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can move if you're incapacitated, which is a difference from the previous one, unless the other thing that incapacitates you also gives the you cannot move or your speed is 0 rider, then you're free to move when you're just incapacitated.
Now, tell me about Invisible, because this one I find very interesting.
So yeah, Invisible it's always been weird. And didn't we talk about like sight and invisibility and finding things on a previous show?
Yeah, stealth type hiding. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So for 2014, it's an invisible creature is impossible to see without the aid of magic or special sense. So for the purpose of hiding, the creature is heavily obscured. So they're using the game term heavily obscured to show something that's completely unobscured, including your body, which is weird. The creature's location can be detected by any noise it makes or any track it leaves. So you can still be found when you're invisible. Attack rolls against the creature have disadvantage, and the creature's attack rolls have advantage. And this got into the weird situation where you would need to make a hide check while you were invisible, or a creature would know exactly where you were. They still couldn't see you, which led to problems, but they knew. So an area of effect spell would still be able to target them.
Right.
So what do we have for 2024? We have surprise. If you are invisible when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll because you have surprised the enemy. Concealed. You aren't affected by any effect that requires its target to be seen unless the effect's creator can somehow see you. Any equipment you are wearing or carrying is also concealed. And then the attacks affected. The attack rolls still have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. If the creature can somehow see you, you don't gain this benefit against that creature. Boom. So in some ways, it's simplified, but in some ways, it really didn't change much. Well, unless we go outside and look at other terms.
Yeah, hidden and all that. It's now sort of an underpin for being hidden. I think one thing here, this equipment you're wearing or carrying is also concealed because it doesn't say at the time of gaining this condition. It says to me that question of like when I'm invisible and I pick up the thing from the table, is that visible or invisible? Right? And it's always fun in movies that you can see it, and in novels too. This to me suggests I can pick up a thing and it becomes invisible. Because it doesn't limit it.
If you drop something, it becomes visible. Yeah.
Right. If I drop something, it's visible. An effect that leaves me is visible, but the thing on my body, and that's interesting because I would have thought otherwise. But the wording of this, and I don't know if it's intended or not, but now that you went and said it this way, I end up thinking this, and that's the danger of saying too much. It's fine. This is fine.
Yeah. I agree. It's some things are a little trickier, but for the most part, paralyzed. So basically the same. In 2014, there were 4 riders saying that you're incapacitated, can't move or speak, automatically fail strength dex saving throws, attacks against you have advantage. Any attack that hits you is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of you. Yeah. And in 2014, now we have 5 riders. So it's incapacitated again. Your speed is 0 and can't increase. Automatically fail strength saving throws. And then the same 2 attacks affected and automatic critical hits are there. And this can't move from the 2014 rules is one of the reasons why some people want a game that gives more game-specific or rule-specific verbiage, well, both verbiage and verbiage. But because a paralyzed creature in 2014 is incapacitated and can't move or speak. And move there is a word that means different things to different people, right? Some people say all that means is you cannot leave the square you're in because your speed is 0, where some people means you can't blink, you can't shift your eyes. And while game mechanically that might not be a big deal, me being able to move my eyes and give hints to where a creature might have gone or blink twice to tell me the answer to this is a huge story thing for a game. And so now with 2024 paralyzed, we have your speed is 0 and can't increase. You're incapacitated, so you can't take actions. But what now does that mean in terms of what you can do within the parameters of all of those different riders?
Right.
Can you blink? Can you whistle? It's not speaking. Can you? So it's still a question that is unanswered and will change from table to
And I
table.
communicate telepathically, right?
Right.
Yeah. Am I witnessing
Everything.
things? Did I
Oh,
see what happened in the room? There's a lot there that I wish we knew a little better
mhm.
with both paralyzed and petrified.
Yep. And the rest are very, very similar. I think the stunned condition, since
Mm.
incapacitated uh, changed to say you can move, I don't think the 2024 stunned condition says you can't move. And unless I'm wrong, uh, I can look it up relatively quickly.
That is interesting.
Uh, so stunned,
I don't see it saying that you can't move.
right.
Incapacitated.
Since
Yeah.
incapacitated removed that rider of you can't move, and stunned,
Yeah.
gotta switch over here.
Yeah.
Stunned.
So you can move when
You have
stunned, which is interesting.
you can move while stunned at this point. Will that be changed? We'll find out. And the last thing is the prone condition. I just wanted to make this note because I thought it was hilarious. In 2014, a prone creature's only movement option is to crawl unless it stands up and thereby ends the condition. Well, say you knock something without a form prone.
Mm-hmm.
Can a jelly stand up? So what they did in 2024 was your only movement options are to crawl or to spend an amount of movement equal to half your speed to, quote, right yourself and thereby end the condition. So they've gotten rid of stand up and added right yourself. And I thought that's hilarious and super pedantic, but by golly, with the rules lawyers out there, sometimes you have to be super pedantic and therefore ruin the game for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's hilarious and terrifying, and that's where we stand.
Yeah. What else? I think that unconscious, if I recall correctly, let me check and make sure this is true. So unconscious now says you're unaware of your surroundings. I don't know that it said that before.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and
Which
then
again,
an open
for
question
yeah.
is, yeah, go ahead while I look this up.
Well, it's they've tried so hard to make everything mean something,
Yeah.
and then you get this and are not aware of your surroundings. What does that mean? Are Can you see? Why not add the blinded condition when you're unconscious?
Because you're
You've
also
got the
deaf and you're, yeah.
condition. Yeah, you've got all those conditions right there. Why not use them? Why say unaware of your surroundings, which could, for some people, that means I can do anything because while I'm unaware of my surroundings, it doesn't mean I can't do blank. It's weird. So yeah.
Yeah, it is weird. The other thing is not in the list of conditions, but bloodied now exists as a keyword
Mm,
where you have
yep.
half your hit points or fewer remaining. And that's one where it's like, okay, hmm, interesting.
Mhm.
To me, that's very much a condition, but they didn't want to add it as a on the condition
Right.
list. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, in the game design I'm doing for Grim Hollow right now, we're using bloodied a lot
Nice.
because I remember that from, third, fourth edition. And it was, you could do a lot of cool things with it. Tactically, that didn't add a lot of weight to the game.
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Just a small area of the game with some
Mm,
small subtle but really signifies the design intent changing, right? Different approach to how rules should be used by DMs and what they should say or not say.
yeah. So we'll continue our look next time with some other element of the game to look at why it's there, what it was, and what it is now. let's quickly hop over, land safely in the realm of Greyhawk, where we talk about even more regions from the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer with a hopeful look forward to what they're going to present in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide in their discussion of Greyhawk there. Shall we jump into the regions that we have to yet to cover?
Let's do it, and let's start with the folks depicted in this art, which is holding up a picture that shows sort of genie married type characters speaking to some folks who are all wearing turbans and that kind of attire that we would associate with maybe Middle Eastern cultures in our real world, even though we're in a fantasy world.
Yep. And he's talking about the plains of the Paynims. And so what's that? Well, it is a loosely affiliated area with tribes of Backloonish nomads, hence the turbans and the Middle Eastern look, that have a hierarchy of nobles but no rigid structure. So this is in the far, far, far west of the Eastern Fleneus, where the Backloonish nations existed before the invoked devastation that we talked about at the start of this whole look at Greyhawk. So these are now grasslands that aren't necessarily great for farming, but do allow for livestock to graze and some herbs to grow. And since the soil is poor, there are nomads there. They have to keep moving to find the best soil and the best sources of water. But there are clear parallels to the nomads of Asia. So if you go all the way back to the horse riding Mongol Empire, you get very strong themes of that here.
And it reflects all of those kinds of issues, right? That somehow when Rome does things, oh, well, that's an ordered society doing things. But when Mongol raiders sweep through, well, that is a totally terrible thing, right? And,
Yep.
it reflects this, right? The designers give them a chaotic alignment, right? Raiders and thieves. And it's like, okay. It's like they can't even read their own words about the lack of resources and how you have to move around and do a lot of gathering of resources rather than going around and hey, they're attacking like every other one of these nations here, but they get the chaotic label. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. So if you want to do a cool nomadic sort of campaign or adventure or set of adventures, this is a good place to set it. You can do this. You can do. I think back to Game of Thrones, and I didn't read the books, but I only watched part of the series. But that sort of, uh, nomadic tribal
Right. The horse
force.
lords, the Rohan
Yeah,
of Lord of the Rings, or
that sort of thing. Uh, to a greater or lesser extent, there is an area of there that is already steeped in that sort of background.
yeah. The other thing that's cool about them, but it's not super focused, as we've said, often this book brushes over the neat stuff, right? So there are these stone circles of Tovag Baru on the waters of Udru Kankar. I mean, that already sounds amazing. And that's where these marrieds that I showed in the picture have showed up. And the married gave a gift identifying the next Backloonish emperor to a bunch of traveling traders. But the traders lost this gift. And so the emperor was never recognized. So that right there is a giant thing that could change everything. And then they don't really say what Tovag Baru is, but it's appeared in a number of other works. And it is all that remains of the capital of the Backloonish Empire after the invoked devastation. It's a site of power. There are ties to Vecna in later adventures. And so there's a lot that can be done with this place, and we're not really told about that. And then we have a lot of prophecies of war, a possible son of the deity of Al Akbar provided as intrigues. There was the some folks of these plains who are more aggressive attacked Ket and held it until Keelan freed it. So there's a lot of interesting pieces here if you could kind of reshape this and work on it.
Yep. And we'll jump from the dry plains of the Paynims to Perrenland, which is a place where, well, first of all, it's named after Jeff Perrin, who was a game designer with TSR back in the day.
Yeah, and co-designer of
Uh,
Chainmail, and yeah,
there you go. And so a bunch of people war, and then their eventual leader named Perrin sort of brings them all together, and they named the land after him. What else is up with Perrenland?
the coolest thing here is the archmage and witch Igwilv. She resides in the quote unquote lost caverns, they say here, Sojkanth. Her, or Sojkan if you're Chris Perkins. Her armies of evil humanoids conquer Perrenland with priests of St. Cuthbert trying to win it back. And what actually turns the tide of battle is when she's quote unquote brought low, when a great demon prince she holds captive escapes. And later there it's said to be Grazd, and her son is revealed to be Ayuz. And so it's a big deal that she held Grazd captive and consorted with him, because this leads to Ayuz being on the land. So really big oops for anybody who's good. Good. And then there are always rumors that Igwilv is coming back. This is all written before Tasha was also said to be Igwilv. I won't get into the super history of it, but now we say, or at least designers say, that Tasha and Igwilv are one and the same, which is always a little tough because she's made to be kind of good in more later products, or goodish, or chaotic, or whatever. But she does terrible stuff back in Greyhawk, right? Like really, really terrible stuff. Is as dangerous as Ayuz or Grazd or any of these demon lords that we would accept are through and through evil. So.
So a little history there. The Pomarj is the next region, and this region is interesting because it is the land of Turash Mach, who is a half-orc who rose to power over the years in a specific series of adventures called the A series back in the early AD&D days. And when the villains of those adventures who would take captives, and it was also called the Slave Lord series. After they were defeated, Turash Mach unites all the orcs and other humanoids in this area and takes it over, and it becomes its own nation.
Yeah. And it says here his next goal is to conquer Selene, the Elven Kingdom we detailed a few episodes ago. Highport is described as an interesting city. There's not a whole lot here to go on, but this city on the northern coast is the largest city in the Pomarj, and it's dark. It has all manner of inhabitants, and one thing that's kind of neat is sort of like who's around during the day is different than the night. And so the night is this indication of where the city is headed, as all kinds of evil humanoids or have like sort of their own markets at night and so on, and everybody who's maybe goodish is closing their shutters and pretending this isn't going on, which is an interesting idea.
Yeah. So, this place is perfect for that. You need to infiltrate this evil land and try to wreak havoc, assassinate, help retake over the land, unless you're going to play sort of the humanoids, and then you can, play as the orcs or other quote unquote evil humanoids who are just trying to protect what's yours and fight off these evil humans and elves and dwarves,
or
and
change
other
it from
folk.
within. The other thing, if you're looking for more traditional adventure, there's the Draken's Grab Hills and Sus Forest. They're just kind of named here. There's a section later that talks about hills, mountains, so on. But Draken's Grab means Tomb of the Dragon, and I mean, you just tell players that, and everybody goes, "Ooh."
There you go. We'll head north to Ratik, which sits beneath the remnants of the old Great Kingdom to the south and the various barbarian lands to the north. Ratik was named for a general who held back the barbarians, and he was granted the land by the Overking of the Great Kingdom, and then later became independent. And we see this story play out throughout many of the regions here. Part of the Great Kingdom on the outskirts at one point. When the Great Kingdom starts to decay, these individual lands become their own independent nations. What else is cool about Ratik?
I mean, it's kind of cool, but also sort of like we've already heard a number of cases of and the king falls ill and the wife falls ill, or some
Yeah.
variation of that. And so in this case, it's gnolls in the Bone March defeat the king's son when they go off on a sort of mini crusade. The king falls ill right after that, and so now I think it's the Lady Evely, the queen. She struggles to rule because her family is originally from Bone March, so she's not fully trusted by the people of Ratik. And so they're in a very perilous position between trying to have peace with various tribes to the north, trying to deal with the Bone March and other forces around them. And so great danger here, very, very much on the edge, right? Which is so Greyhawk, right? Everything is a powder keg waiting for one little bit to send it one way or the other, which can be a lot of fun if you like that kind of impetus for change.
Yep. And the last region that we will look at in this episode is Rel Astra and the Solnor Compact. Rel Astra is a free and independent city-state under the rule of an undead administrator advised by a demon.
Whoa.
It's good work if you can. It's good work if you can get it. And when I become a ruler of my own evil domain, I want to be called Drax the Invulnerable. Just putting that out there right now.
I mean, the title Fiend Sage for the administrator, also pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is an interesting one in the sense that this is another place that has broken away from the Great Kingdom over the years. And so it is called lawful evil because it is run by this undead person being advised by a demon. But he's also called pragmatic and like with a wry sense of humor. And while he is obviously evil, it's not like this horrible, like with Ayuz, that this sort of destruction is described. It sort of is fighting against evil all around them. And they have joined with these other free city-states to make the Solnor Compact. So this area is on the far eastern coast of the Flanaeus, south of the North Kingdom, and east of Alyssa. So it's sitting there in its own little long coastal stretch where these city-states have formed a pact to defend each other against any aggression from bigger powers.
Yeah.
And Rel Astra is seen as one of the largest cities in all of Greyhawk. Greyhawk City and Gradsul and some of the other cities would argue, but it's still large and it's got 3 sections. So you can do the old city, the common city, then the foreign quarter. So you can have all sorts of intrigue within that. And there's also political intrigue between these city states in the alliance. So while they are a pact, while they are a compact, there's always someone trying to woo one of the city states to leave the compact and join them through marriage or through intrigue. The Scarlet Brotherhood is always there. The Old Kingdom is still trying to get their claws in it. Alyssa, the same thing. So it's a place where you could have some fun intrigue if you wanted.
I mean, this is a really cool sort of overlooked region, I think, because it's so far off to the side. But if you think about it with the North Kingdom remnants, with the, Alyssa, Sundi, Scarlet Brotherhood, Onwall kind of being to the south and southeast. You've got the Sea Barons and the Lendor Isles to the east. So you got a lot of oceany type fun stuff that can happen. The Hypmonoland down below. There's a lot that you can go off of here. I would always rather be sort of partly biased because it's where I played the most in Living Greyhawk, but I really like that Sheldamar Valley region. And of course, being right by Greyhawk is really cool. But this is a really nice option for a campaign. There's a lot here that you can work off of and easily add to without making any real changes.
And with that, we will say adieu to Greyhawk until next time. And we will say adieu to all of our listeners. Thank you so much. And we will say thank you specifically to all of our patrons. who have backed us at patreon.com/masteringdnd. We have Master of Realm supporters. Thank you. We have Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you as well. The Master of Realms gets a little shout out in our show notes. And the Masters of the Multiverse, well, they get their names read like this. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, David Bastiansen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges Avalos, Evil John, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, The Mighty Jerd, Brian King, Jim Klingler, a.k.a. DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Ann B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, who makes the great Greyhawk maps that we use, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, Mighty Zeus, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simosa, Josh and Luanica of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Trace, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Chris Webster, Walt Winfrey. Thank you all for listening and for being patrons. Again, you can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd and you can let us know with your hard-earned pesos what it means to you to listen to us yabber. Also, you can talk
when
to
you
us.
say it like that.
Yeah. You can leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast, or go to YouTube and you can see us. As horrifying as that sounds, you can see us, comment on the show, like, subscribe, do all the stuff. And we thank you for that. Teos, what you been up to on social media and where can people find you?
I have been slowly recovering from a work onslaught, but you can find me at alphastream.org. Someday there will be my PAX retrospective when I can finally write on my blog. Otherwise, find from there all the things that I'm up to. Shawn, if I want to find you, where do I go?
I am slowly not recovering from a work onslaught, but you can find me on at Shawn Merwin at all the socials, or you can go on socials to at Mastering DND and follow us there. All the places, the Twitter-ishness, whatever that is, Mastodon, Blue Sky. Join us on Patreon. Leave comments on our YouTube channel. Yay, do the things. And now, what are we going to do?
Ooh. Well, I didn't want to spoil it this early, but since you brought it up, I have actually started the paperwork to change your name to Shawn the Invulnerable.
Mm-hmm. I can only wish. I can only wish.